Good morning, second grade. This is a video for all three of our second grade classes, myself, Miss Kinsella, and Miss S's classes. Today, I'm going to introduce you to a new chapter book that we're going to read together, and I'm going to read chapter 1 for you. So the chapter book that we're going to start reading today is The Mouse and the Motorcycle by author Beverly Cleary. Now, it's really important that you have a copy of this book. And don't worry, I have a copy of this book for you. Have one of your parents go to Lloyd's school and ask for the second grade book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle, and they have a copy for you at the office. So as we read the book together, it's really important that even though myself or Miss S or Miss Kinsella will be reading the chapters, it's important that you follow along with the words so that you can see them and not just hear them. It's easy to hear a book, but it's important that we're looking at the words and learning words too, and making sure that we're practicing reading so that we can become better readers. So please, please, please try not to just listen to the words, but have one of your parents go to Lloyd's school and pick up one of these books so that we can read together. And as I read, you can follow along with the words in the book. Alright, so before we start reading The Mouse and the Motorcycle, I know that you're not here and can't answer my questions for me. So I'm going to ask a question, and I'm going to give you a couple seconds to think about the answer in your head before we continue reading. So first of all, just by looking at the title of this book and the front cover, I want you to think about, do you think this book is fiction or nonfiction? And try to remember, what does fiction mean and nonfiction mean? Do you remember my hint from class? Non-fiction starts with an N sound, and fiction starts with an F sound. Fiction books are fake. They're made up books. And non-fiction books are not fake. They're not made up, and they're real. We don't know what this book is about yet because we haven't started reading, but just by looking at the front cover, I'm noticing drawings, not real photographs, and it kind of looks like this mouse might ride this motorcycle, maybe? If that's the case, it sounds like this book is probably made up, so we know it's fake or fiction. So The Mouse and the Motorcycle is a fiction book written by Beverly Cleary. Now, you may notice behind me, I have a poster here. I think you'll see it backwards. But it says, the title of the book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle, and then backwards, I'll show you a better view later, but it says characters. So as we start reading, I'm going to start making a character list. And I'm going to make the character list a little bit differently than we've made one in class, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. But basically, every time we meet a new character, I'm going to draw a little picture of that character on this poster. And then on a sticky note, I'm going to start writing down important facts about that character. Things like, how old do we think that character is? Maybe what are some of their character traits? Where do they live? What important events are they going to face? Or anything else important that we think we need to add to the board. Does that sound good? All right, let's get started reading chapter 1. Alright, notice even though this is a fiction book, it still has a table of contents, and it's telling us that chapter 1 starts on page 1. Now this is the time, if you have your copy of The Mouse and the Motorcycle, please grab it, turn to page 1, and when I start reading, you can follow along with me. Now, if you don't have the book with you, don't worry. If there's any pictures, I'll show it to you, but so that I'm able to read the book, I'm going to have to turn it towards me for now. Alright, start listening. Chapter 1, The New Guests. Keith, the boy in the rumpled shorts and shirt, did not know he was being watched as he entered room 215 of the Mountain View Inn. That sounds like the name of a hotel. Neither did Keith's mother and father, who both looked taut and tired. They had come from Ohio and for 5 days had driven across plains and deserts and over mountains to the old hotel in the California foothills, 25 miles from Highway 40. All right, before I go on to page 2, I want you to stop and think. Where did it say that Keith and his family came from? And where are they traveling to? For example, if this book was about us, it'd say that they were coming from Chicago and traveling somewhere else, right? So where is Keith's family from? Go ahead, take a look through that first page and see where it said. Did you find it? It said they came from Ohio, and they're traveling through California right now. So they've been driving a long time in the car. If you could look at a map, you'll see Ohio and California are states that are nowhere near each other. All right, go ahead and turn to page 2. The fourth person entering room 215 may have known he was being watched, but he did not care. He was Matt, 60 if he was a day, who at the moment was the bellboy. Here's a picture of Matt. So Matt is 60 years old, and he's the bellboy for the hotel. In the background is a boy. We met a boy already. It said his name was Keith. Matt, the bellboy, also replaced worn-out light bulbs, renewed washers and leaky faucets, carried trays for people who telephoned room service to order food sent to their rooms, and sometimes prevented children from hitting one another with croquet mallets on the lawn behind the hotel. Now Matt's right shoulder sagged with the weight of one of the bags he was carrying. "Here you are, Mr. Gridley." Ooh, that's a new character, Mr. Gridley. "Rooms 215 and 216, he said, setting the smaller of the bags on a luggage rack at the foot of the double bed before he opened a door into the next room. "I expect you and Mrs. Gridley," a new character, Mrs. Gridley, "will want room 216. It is a corner room with twin beds and a private bath." He carried the heavy bag into the next room, where he could be heard opening windows. Outside, a chipmunk chattered in a pine tree, and a chickadee whistled, "Phoebe." The boy's mother looked critically around room 215 and whispered, "I think we should drive back to the main highway. There must be a motel with a vacancy sign someplace. We didn't look long enough." What does the word critically mean? That word is on page 3. It says the mom looked around the hotel room critically. She's saying there must be another hotel that they could have gone to instead of this one. Does it sound like she likes this hotel if she's thinking about going to another one? She's not liking this hotel. Critically means she's looking at it, kind of judging what the hotel room is like. So I wonder what it's going to look like. Let's see if it tells us on the next page. So we're turning to page 4 right now if you're following along with us. "Not another mile," answered the father. "I'm not driving another mile on a California highway on a holiday weekend. Did you see the way that truck almost forced us off the road?" "Dad, did you see those two fellows on motorcycles?" began the boy, and then he stopped, realizing he should not interrupt an argument. So, Keith's mom and dad, Mr. and Mrs. Gridley, are arguing right now. Why? Well, Mrs. Gridley is wanting to find another hotel, and Mr. Gridley says, "I'm not driving anymore." So let's see what happens. All right, we're still on page 4. "But this place is so old," protested the boy's mother, "and we have only 3 weeks for our whole trip. We had planned to spend the 4th of July weekend in San Francisco, and we wanted to show Keith as much of the United States as we could. San Francisco will have to wait, and this is part of the United States. Besides, this used to be a very fashionable hotel," said Mr. Gridley. "People came from miles around." 50 years ago, said Mrs. Gridley, "and they came by horse and buggy." So Mrs. Gridley is saying that she doesn't like the hotel, and she mentioned a word on page 4. Can you find it? She said, "This place is so old." And then she's saying that it was popular 50 years ago. So the hotel room maybe is looking pretty old and run down. Let's see what other information we find out about the hotel. We're starting on page 5 now. The bellboy returned to room 215. "The dining room opens at 6:30, sir. There is ping pong in the game room, TV in the lobby, and croquet on the back lawn." Croquet is a game, it's kind of a sport, sort of like golf. "I'm sure you will be very comfortable." Matt, who had seen guests come and go for many years, knew there were 2 kinds. those who thought the hotel was a dreadful place, a dreadful old barn of a place, and those who thought it was charming and quaint, so quiet and restful. "Of course we will be comfortable," said Mr. Gridley, dropping some coins into Matt's hand for carrying the bags. "But this big old hotel is positively spooky," Mrs. Gridley made one last protest. "It's probably full of mice." Matt opened the window wide. "Mice? Oh no, ma'am, the management wouldn't stand for mice." "I wouldn't mind a few mice," the boy said, as he looked around the room at the high ceiling, the knotty pine walls, the carpet so threadbare, that means the carpet's running really low, and doesn't have much like threads in it left. So the carpet's so threadbare that many of its roses had almost entirely faded. The one chair with the antimacassar on its back, the wash basin and the towel racks in the corner of the room. "I like it here," he announced. "A whole room to myself? Usually I just get a cot in the corner of a motel room." His mother smiled, relenting. That means she's giving in. Then she turned to Matt. "I'm sorry, it's just that it was so hot crossing Nevada, and we are not used to mountain driving. Back on the highway, the traffic was bumper to bumper. I'm sure we shall be very comfortable." After Matt had gone, closing the door behind him, Mr. Gridley said, "I need a rest before dinner. 400 miles of driving, and that mountain traffic. It was too much." "And if we are going to stay for a weekend, I had better unpack," said Mrs. Gridley. "At least I'll have a chance to do some drip drying." Alone in room 215, and unaware that he was being watched, the boy began to explore. He got down on his hands and knees and looked under the bed. He leaned out the open window as far as he could and greedily inhaled deep breaths of pine-scented air. Pines are a type of trees. He turned the hot and the cold water on and off in the wash basin, another word for sink, and slipped one of the small bars of paper-wrapped soap into his pocket. Under the window, he discovered a knot hole in the pine wall down by the floor, and squatting, poked his finger into the hole. It's like a knot hole is the part of wood that sort of looks like a hole, so he's poking his finger in there. When he felt nothing inside, he lost interest. Next, Keith opened his suitcase and took out an apple and several small cars, a sedan, a sports car, and an ambulance about 6 inches long, and a red motorcycle half the length of the cars, which he dropped on the striped bedspread before he bit into the apple. He ate the apple noisily, in big chomping bites, and then laid the core on the bedside table between the lamp and the telephone. We just started page 8 at this point. Keith began to play, running his cars up and down the bedspread, pretending that the stripes on the spread were highways, and making noises with his mouth. Vroom, vroom, for the sports car. Wee, wee, for the ambulance, and for the motorcycle, up and down the stripes. Once Keith stopped suddenly and looked quickly around the room as if he expected to see something or someone, but when he saw nothing unusual, he returned to his cars. I'm going to stop right there, because I noticed that back on page 7, at the top of page 7, it said, "Alone in room 215 and unaware that he was being watched, the boy began to explore." So Keith is being watched by someone right now, and we don't know who. And then on page 8, where I just stopped reading, I'll show you that picture again in a minute, it said that Keith stopped suddenly and looked around the room as if he expected to see someone or something. It's almost like he feels that someone is watching him, but we don't know who's watching him yet. That's a little bit creepy that somebody's watching him playing with his cars. Do you have any guesses of who it is? Think about it for a minute. Is it a character we already met? Or maybe it's a new character? Let's keep reading. We're in the middle of page 8 right now. Vroom, vroom, bang, crash! The sports car hit the sedan and rolled over off of the highway stripe. The motorcycle came roaring to the scene of the crash. "Keith," his mother called from the next room. "Time to get washed for dinner." "Okay." Keith parked his cars in a straight line on the bedside table beside his telephone, where they looked like a row of real cars, only much, much smaller. Here was Keith playing with his cars. The first thing Mrs. Gridley noticed when she and Mr. Gridley came into the room was the apple core on the table. She dropped it with a thunk into the metal wastebasket beside the table as she gave several quick little sniffs of air and said, looking perplexed, "I don't care what the bellboy said. I'm sure this hotel has mice." "I hope so," muttered Keith. And that is the end of chapter 1. Alright, so now that we've finished reading chapter 1 of The Mouse and the Motorcycle, we're going to start making a poster of all the characters we've met so far in the story, and as we meet more characters in the book, we'll add to this poster too. Now, some of the things we're going to include in this poster, we're going to start writing the names of the characters. I am going to put like a little picture of each character, and we're going to start putting up some little facts and information that's important about the character. And we're going to put up those facts with, well, usually I would use sticky notes, but I actually don't have any sticky notes at my house, which I was surprised to realize. So what I did is I cut up some little pieces of paper in about, they're kind of the size of sticky notes, so I'm going to put a little bit of tape on them and stick them onto our poster. So we're going to be putting important information about the characters on these. So what I want you guys to do with me is I want you to take your Mouse and the Motorcycle book, turn back to page 1 at the beginning of the chapter, and see what character do we meet first. And I'll give you a hint right away. First sentence of the book, we meet our first character. The first sentence in chapter 1 says, Keith, the boy in the rumpled shorts and shirt. So first we meet Keith, and he is our main person in the story. Alright, so here's the poster so far. Now what I did is I have a box here for Keith, and we later find out that his last name is Gridley. So here's our box for Keith Gridley. Here's a little picture of what I imagine that Keith might look like. Now what we're going to be doing is I want you to go through the book and see if you can find out important information about Keith. Now this would be a good time to pause this video, go through chapter 1, and see what important information you can find about Keith. Things like about how old you think he is, where does he live, did we learn any important facts or character traits about Keith? Go ahead and pause this video now and take a look through chapter 1. So hopefully you took a minute to pause this video and look back through chapter 1 and find some important facts about Keith. So first of all, let's talk about how old we think Keith is. Going through, he's playing with toy cars, so he's probably not a super old kid, but also he's old enough that he's actually kind of sleeping in his own hotel room in the story. So because he's playing with cars, he's definitely not a teenager or an older kid, and because he's obviously not like a little kid either. So I'm guessing he is maybe around 7 or 8 years old. Oh, this is going to be backwards for you, but this says that he's a boy around 7 or 8 years old. So I'm going to stick that up on our poster in a minute. I also wanted to figure out, like, where's Keith from? On chapter 1, if I go back and look for some evidence in the text, right on page 1, it says that the family came from Ohio and that they're driving across the country because they're on a vacation. So I thought that was something important about Keith. So on the next note card, I wrote that Keith lives in Ohio and that he's on vacation. And lastly, we haven't really learned character traits about Keith yet. We've just been introduced to him. But I did notice that he seems to like some certain things. Going back and looking for evidence, I noticed that he is playing with these toy cars. So it seems like he likes them. He lines them up, and even when he leaves the room and gets ready for dinner, it says that he lined them up on his like nightstand or bedside table. So it seems like he really cares about his cars and likes playing with them. Also, he's really hoping for a certain kind of animal in his hotel room. He's hoping that mice come in there, it says on the last page of the chapter. So I'm guessing that he likes animals. So on this next little note card, I wrote some things that Keith seems to like. He likes playing with his toy cars, and it seems like he likes animals. So I'm going to add these to our Keith part of the poster. Okay, here's what my Keith part of the poster looks like now that we've put up these little note cards here. I didn't want to fill in all this space because I'm sure that we're going to learn more about Keith as we keep reading the book. All right, let's keep looking for different characters in chapter 1. Right after it introduces us to Keith on page 1, it says, starts talking about his mother and father, saying they both look hot and tired. If we keep looking, we see that their names are Mr. Gridley, that's Keith's dad, and Mrs. Gridley, that's Keith's mom. Here's what I have next on the poster, right underneath Keith here. I have his dad and his mom, Mr. and Mrs. Gridley. So now is a good time to pause the video again, and I want you to look back through chapter 1 and see if you can find out any important facts or information about Mr. and Mrs. Gridley. Let's talk about what we found about Mr. and Mrs. Gridley. As I looked back through chapter 1 for evidence about kind of some important facts about Mr. Gridley, I realized we didn't learn too much information about him, at least nothing super important to add to the poster, except for there were only 2 things that I could find that I felt like were pretty important about Mr. Gridley. One is that he's Keith's dad, that's pretty important. And another, it kept saying in the first chapter that Mr. Gridley was really tired. And it seemed like he was tired from driving. So they had driven across the whole country and he's pretty tired from driving. Those are the only 2 really important pieces of information I feel like we learned about Mr. Gridley. But now let's talk about Mrs. Gridley. Just like we discovered Mr. Gridley's Keith's dad, it's important to know that Mrs. Gridley is Keith's mom. So that's the first piece of information I found. As I kept looking through, I feel like we learned 2 important pieces of information about her, other than that she's Keith's mom. And one of that is being that she doesn't like the hotel that they're staying at. Maybe you can go back through and see why she doesn't like the hotel. That's going to be one of the questions you're going to be answering in your packet after you finish watching this video, is why Keith's mom doesn't like the hotel. So go back through and see if you can find some reasons why Keith's mom doesn't like the hotel. And another thing I feel like is going to be really important, especially with the title of our book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle, Keith's mom is really hoping that there's not going to be any mice in their hotel room. So I think she's scared of mice, and I think that's an important fact that we learned about her. All right, so here is what this part of the poster looks like now. I posted up those facts that we just talked about, Mr. and Mrs. Gridley. There's one more character that we meet in chapter 1, and it actually introduces that character on page 2. So the book introduces us to the first 4 characters that we've met right away. And there's actually a picture of that 4th character on page 2. So if you turn to page 2, the first couple of sentences say, "The 4th person entering room 215 may have known he was being watched, but he did not care. He was Matt." So our 4th character's name is Matt. And there's a picture of him right there. This is Matt, and here's Keith in the background. So go ahead, pause the video one last time and see what important information or facts you can find about Matt. Alright, so as I went back through chapter 1, there were only a couple of facts that I feel like are really important about Matt so far. First of all, how old is Matt? Is he a little kid? Is he super old? And it actually tells us the age of Matt on page 2. It says that Matt, 60 if he was a day, so he's about 60 years old. So on my first little card, I put that he's about 60 years old. The other important thing about Matt is, like, who is he? Is he a relative of Keith? Or is he a friend? And the book actually tells us that Matt works at the hotel. So I put on the second card that he works at the hotel. Now, he has a lot of different jobs at the hotel. It says that he's a bellboy. A bellboy is somebody who carries like the luggage and suitcases at a hotel, and he also fixes things around the hotel when they get broken. So we can't really say that he has a specific job at the hotel, but it's very important that we know that he works there. So let's add these 2 facts up on our poster about Matt. Okay, here's the part of the poster about Matt. I know that this doesn't really look like the picture of him in the book, but that's what a bellhop outfit looks like. So I wanted to show that we know that he's kind of a bellhop and carries some luggage. So there's the facts. So here's our poster so far. We've got Matt here, Mr. and Mrs. Gridley, Keith, and I also have left a space for an important character that we're going to be learning about very soon. All right, so we have finished chapter 1 of the book. So now what you're going to do, now that we've read the chapter, talked about some of the characters and kind of what's going on in the story, you're going to go to your packet and you're going to fill out a couple of pages and answer some questions about chapter 1 of the story. Now tomorrow you can check in and read chapter 2 of the book with Miss Kinsella. So thanks for joining me, boys and girls. I hope you're enjoying the Mouse and the Motorcycle so far, and I'll see you guys soon.